and this is how we're going to change the world, and this is how we're going to move forward, is with real connections with people like this and communities like this, and being in the thick of what's happening to sharks is how we're going to save them.
Welcome to Shellphone, the podcast that gives the ocean its very own hotline. Join us as we hear from ocean stewards, discover threats to ocean health, and learn ways we can all answer the ocean's call. This podcast is brought to you in part by the Tampa Bay Estuary Program and Coastal Creative. I'm Harmony Dawson, and joining us this episode is Madison Stewart from Project HIU.
So, first of all, major props to you for saying it correctly, because I know that that's always a challenge, but you pronounced it perfectly. Project HIU, very proud. So my name's Madison. I grew up in Australia and I was diving with sharks from a really young age because of my parents. And then I got involved in conservation when I was like a teenager because I was noticing a decline of sharks in the areas I grew up diving, like the Great Barrier Reef. So that's when I kind of got involved in conservation and did a bunch of stuff around trying to help sharks in Australia with shark meat for sale, shark fisheries, shark nets, all the threats that they were facing in my own country. And then when it was 2017 actually that I was flown to Indonesia to document a shark market with an Australian film crew, and we were making a documentary there. And it was the first time that I had really seen like that scale of shark fishing. And so I decided to go back a few years later, and that's how Project HIU started. But I guess my background in my life has always had like a lot of shark involvement, a lot of shark conservation, a lot of growing up in the ocean. So it's kind of been my passion from a young age.
That's something that I think I see a lot of people being interested in the ocean when they're very young, and that's kind of what led them into getting into conservation or research or fields like that. When was the first time that you kind of had an in-water interaction with a shark?
Oh, that's a great question. I was about 7 years old when I started getting in the water with sharks, and that was snorkeling on the Great Barrier Reef. So just little reef sharks and things like that. And then I was a certified scuba diver on my 12th birthday because you had to be 12 years old in order to be certified in Australia. So I did it as soon as I turned 12. Did my first dive in the ocean with grey nurse sharks, or sand tiger sharks as you guys call them over here. And then just been diving with sharks since then, been hooked since then. Saw my first great white by accident when I was 18 years old working at a dive shop, and then spent the rest of my life with my dad kind of diving and traveling and seeking out diving with sharks.
Awesome. Yeah, when I was in high school, I took like one diving class in our pool, and then the kind of opportunity never really arose again.
And you're in Florida. Like, you don't even have to scuba. You can just come snorkel with them over here.
I will add that to my list of things to do for sure. You kind of already touched on this, but I wanted to ask about how your focus moved from where you're from in Australia to where Project HIU is based in Indonesia. Could you talk a little bit more about why now you're focusing on the location where you are?
Yeah, absolutely. It's so interesting because growing up, we're so close to Indonesia in Australia, and it's like where everyone goes on holidays. It's kind of like how Mexico is to a lot of people in the USA. So it's kind of odd for someone from Australia to like have never been to Indonesia. And the first time I went was with that film crew to film the shark market. And I had no intention of going to Indonesia before this because they had a reputation for shark fishing and for overfishing their oceans. So I was very strict on like, I'm never going to support that economy. I'm not going to be a tourist there because I don't agree with how they treat their wildlife. And then now I live there, which is crazy. And our project, and kind of the life that we built around the project, is on a small island called Lombok, which is right next to Bali. And it really feels like home. And it's an amazing place. And it's somewhere that I've really adapted to and grown to love. And it's been, I guess, the foundation for a lot of what I've been able to achieve to help sharks. So it was a really happy accident that I was involved with that film crew that took me there. Because if it wasn't for them being like, oh, we're going to pay to, go to this market and we're going to film you looking at the shark catch and paying for my flights and setting up the shoot, I probably never would have gone. So finding this place by accident was really cool.
Could you kind of set the scene of like what the environment there is like, what the community is like, what life there looks like in and out of the water?
Yeah, so Lombok is an amazing island. A lot of people describe it as Bali 30 years ago. So tourism isn't massive in every part of Lombok. So people are super friendly, super keen to talk and meet you, and so helpful. The locals are amazing people. The community that I work in is a little bit different because it's a full shark fishing community. Like everyone in that community either fishes sharks or has ties to someone that fishes sharks. So imagine being a 23 at the time when I started it, a shark conservationist, 23-year-old foreign girl walking into this community being like, "What's up, everyone? Let's change everything you've ever known." So, like, and to start with is kind of crazy. But how far it's developed since then is really a testament to how amazing the people in that community are. And it's really like wonderful little island life there, you know? It's very Indonesian, very local. I love it.
What species are in the water surrounding the island?
The sharks in Indonesia are incredible. Unfortunately, they are so heavily fished that it's not a common occurrence to see them in Lombok itself. But what we see from the shark catchers coming in through our fishermen is a huge variety of species. We know there's a lot of tiger sharks around Indonesia. There's also really amazing whale shark populations. And one of the sharks, pretty much the only shark that we see quite frequently on our trips, are small black tip reef sharks. So that's about the only species that we're guaranteed to see when we go out on our boats. But we know there's a lot of life there. We know how many different species of sharks Indonesia's home to, especially sharks like six gill sharks, you know, really interesting species that haven't really been recorded in that area or studied in that area, but they're there. So it's an incredible place for all that wildlife.
Project HIU is kind of focused on repurposing fishing vessels into tourism vessels. Can you kind of describe that a little bit better than I just did and like what the basis of the project is? I know there are a lot of other pieces that I want to get into talking about, but
Yeah, so long story short, we approach boats that fish sharks. So these are long lining vessels, large vessels, between 30, 40-foot long vessels, hand built artisanal fishing boats that long line sharks. They go for about 2 weeks to 3 weeks at a time offshore, and they come back with a boat full of sharks that they've caught. We approach those boats and give them the tempting offer of not going out to sea for that long and staying back and taking tourist snorkeling locally instead. So we now have 10 boats that work for us, and we have them on a roster system, and we hire them month to month. And each month we prevent one or two of these shark fishing trips, which saves about 60 sharks each trip. And then in that time, they can make the same, if not more money than they would fishing sharks in tourism. And they don't have to go do dangerous shark fishing or leave their families for that long. They stay home and they just go out during the day and take people to go snorkel. So our idea was to be able to do something about the shark fishing in the area without putting someone out of their livelihood or their way to provide for their family. So we just find another financial incentive for them to work, which for us was tourism.
I know that you've gotten very close with the people that you work with, the fishermen and the community in general. And a part of that is still that they still do that fishing. How do you kind of grapple with that?
That's such a good question. And that's something that I always stress when we talk about what we do is that we haven't ended shark fishing. We can stop it in the months that we hire the boats. But in the months that we can't, because we're financially limited, the boats can go fish. And it's so incredible, I guess, seeing the reaction from the fishermen. So the best way I can describe it is we have a roster that we give them every 6 months, and that outlines which boats are getting hired for the next 6 months. And the disappointment in fishermen when they're not on every single month, the sadness in their voices when they know they have to go fishing next month because they don't have another job, the way that they request more time on the roster, and the boats I've been working with the longest insist on having the most time on the roster. Like, there's absolutely no desire from them to go back fishing. There's no joy in it. And you can see when you hand out that roster how they truly feel about it and how stoked they are when they work in tourism. So it's really sad watching boats go back to fishing sharks. But I try to look at the positive that we at least know that it is possible to hire them and we can stop their fishing in 1 month, which is still an impact, even if they're fishing the next month. But they definitely don't want to be. And I think that's a frustrating thing about conservation in general, is that if we were millionaires, like if I was a millionaire, I could end shark fishing because all those boats would happily stay back and work in tourism. But, slowly but surely we'll figure out a way where we can have that happening less and less. And it's also led us to be really careful and meticulous about how we hire our boats. So we hire certain boats at certain times of year based on the weather and how far those boats can travel and the amount of damage they'll do at that time of year to have the maximum impact we can have when it comes to saving sharks and preventing them from catching sharks.
How does Project HIU get the funding to be able to do the different things that you do? I know you have other projects that are also pretty cost intensive, and that's like the research side, the doing other projects for the community, both of which I want to talk a little bit more about later. But how is this project able to sustain itself?
We're super lucky to have support of the people that donate to Project HIU. Our biggest way of doing what we do, and the biggest thing that's been able to help us save sharks, are people's donations. That goes directly into establishing these connections, repurposing these boats, and training the fishermen. The other thing is our merchandise sales and our trips. All the money from that, like we're like the worst run business you could imagine because we make no money. Like if we've made good money 1 month from trips and merchandise, we'll just hire another boat. So we're never like a for-profit business, which is great. That's how we want it. But in Indonesia, we're set up as a tourism business, but we're not set up to make money. So people's donations, when you buy merch, when you join us on a trip, like you can come on a day trip or a week-long trip in Indonesia, and that money is how we keep our boats off the water. So this project is run by hundreds of people from all around the world who are willing to support us in some small way.
I am curious, like, who goes on these trips. I saw something where you were talking about how it's people who are interested in helping save sharks more and not just people who are solely focused on having like a tourist day.
Yeah, it's super interesting actually. We get a massive mix of people. I've had people show up who are shark divers and they've been diving with sharks around the world their whole lives, but now they want to do something different to contribute to helping sharks. And it ends up being like the best trip they've ever done because no one thinks they're going to go on a trip with a bunch of shark fishermen and become best friends with all of them. So I get a lot of people that want to see that side of things, that want to travel and do really local experiences. And then you get like what's crazy to me is people from all over the world, people from Europe, people from Iceland, people from all these places so far away that come and join the trips. It's incredible. The last trip, we had so many people, few Australians, few Americans, few from Europe, and it was just such a good mix of people, all there for their own reasons. Some that had been involved with shark conservation their whole lives. One woman who was absolutely terrified of sharks and wanted nothing to do with them, but had the most amazing time on the trip. So there's something in it for everyone. And I think the best thing about Project HIU is the connections that you get to make with those people. And that's really what like our trips are about. You go on shark diving trips to meet sharks, but you come on a Project HIU trip to meet shark fishermen.
That's awesome. Then I'd like to go back to talking about the community a little bit. You also do some other things to kind of build your place in the community where the fishermen are. I've seen that involves helping with schooling and waste management and things like that. Can you talk more about that and why there's a need for you to do that?
The really interesting thing with making a difference in a community like this is that you're going to piss someone off. And I'm sorry if I can't swear on the podcast, but I just did. So there's a lot of money in shark fins. And these communities in Indonesia are targeted to acquire shark fins because it's very cheap to get them to do so. So there's always someone in this ecosystem, usually someone in China that's getting the final product, that is making a lot of money from what's going on. And the fishermen make money off it as well. So it's a very difficult thing to come up against. And if people in these sorts of communities think you're threatening their livelihood or that trade that makes someone somewhere a lot of money, it can be dangerous. So, one of the ways that Project HIU was able to get as far as it did and succeed and survive is by making sure that every person in that community, whether we hired them or not, didn't feel like we were threatening their jobs and also benefited somehow from our presence. So there are more than 50 boats on this small island where we work, and we hire 10 of them. We're not able to hire every single person yet, but we want all those people to feel like they're benefiting somehow, even if it's indirectly. So we started to do things like put money and time into the school and the education of the kids there, because everybody either has a kid in that school on the island or knows someone that does, and they're all invested in their children more than anything else, which is really beautiful to see. And in doing so and improving that education cycle, that also helps remove kids from entering into fishing when they're older because they'll have more opportunities. So it was a win-win situation for us. So at the school, we built them their first bathroom block. 300 students used to go to the bathroom on the beach outside of their school during class. So we built their first bathrooms, and then we built a 64,000 capacity liter water tank with a filter so the kids had access to clean drinking water, which they never had before. They had to buy water, and it had to be shipped from the mainland to their small island. And that created an economic strain that meant that some kids wouldn't even go to school because they couldn't afford water. So we provided water. We sealed and air conditioned a bunch of the high school classrooms because it gets up to 31 degrees Celsius in there almost every day during the summer. And we also just did a bunch of cool curriculum and art projects in the school. Things like taught English lessons, paid someone to teach English, little things that could improve that environment for all the kids and hope that everyone on the island would benefit. We also started doing a little bit of waste management, so improving some of the trash because there's no way for them to recycle or correctly remove trash from the island. And all these things help the people that live there, and they're all done in conjunction with the desires of the people that live there. So we talk to them about what they want, what that means for them, not what we assume they want, but what they actually want, what they want to improve on, what they need help with on their island. And we try focus on that, as well as focusing on our boats that were fishing sharks.
Yeah, it seems like this project has impacts in a lot of different ways with the community, with the people who go on trips, all of that. But it kind of comes back to the original want to help protect sharks. So, what impacts have you seen on that when it comes to like the populations, the shark fin trade? I also know that you're starting to do more like research into the sharks in the area, doing like tagging and tracking. Can you that's a lot of stuff, but can you kind of breach into that topic?
Yeah, so it's really interesting because when we started, I knew that we would make an impact, but in a trade that is so big, which is the shark fin trade, I didn't think that our impact would actually be affecting anyone. I didn't think it would be on the scale that would piss anyone off until literally June this year when I was in Indonesia. And one of my captains that I work with told me that his ex boss, because he doesn't fish at all anymore, he just does tourism with us, we give him enough work. His ex boss offered him a pay rise to return to fishing because he's one of the most skilled fishermen and one of the biggest boats. So the shark fin buyers that buy these sharks off him wanted to give him more money to go out to fish sharks. And this wasn't a ploy from him to get more money from me. He actually showed me the messages between him and his boss, and his boss was actually just wanting him to go back to fishing. So I think their absence is being felt. Of course, he denied that offer because he wants to keep doing tourism. He's got a young baby at home and he doesn't like leaving the family. So he's more happy doing tourism. So he turned down more money to stay with us, which is really incredible. At the same time, there are many shark fin buyers at the market where we work, and most of them are really nice people and just like our fishermen trying to make a living. But there are some that do not like me. And those ones express very openly how they are getting affected by our work there. And one of my very close shark fishermen put it in simple terms. He said, his money is down, boss, which means that he's just not making as much money as he used to because his major players and the major fishermen he would buy from work for me now. So there's that really cool element of it where we're starting to see these little signs that we are actually making a dent. And it's taken us a few years and a lot of progress, but it's happening. So in a world where it seems sometimes impossible to help our oceans in a way that's meaningful, knowing that you've pissed off a shark fin buyer is like the coolest thing you could ever do. So that's been a really, really cool thing for us. In regards to our research, probably one of the sickest things about Project HIU has been watching shark fishermen use their skills and their knowledge of where to find and fish sharks to help us catch, tag, and release sharks. And it's the first time that anyone has ever tagged tiger sharks in Indonesia, which is wild because we have so much data on tiger sharks from so many parts of the world, but none in Indonesia, the largest shark fishing nation. Like that's where we should be tagging sharks, right? So we use these fishermen and use their knowledge and somehow convince them to go show me where they fish, tag the sharks with us, and then release them. And the data we're getting from that is really incredible. And it was also just incredible watching fishermen become part of researching sharks and putting time and energy and effort into doing so and taking pride in it. And every shark that we caught and tagged, we named it after one of our crew's kids. So we have a bunch of sharks swimming around named after like the daughters and sons of the fishermen that we work with. So they had a reason to have a lot of pride in these sharks that they tagged.
Yeah, that's amazing. What is the goal for the outcome of doing that tagging and research?
The data that we can gather from something like that can help us protect these sharks. Now, I'm not a scientist, so the scientists explain it way more fluently than I do, the scientists that we work with to get this data. But the way that I can explain it, which is how I see it in my head, is we're never going to protect what we don't understand. And already, an example of how this data is helping us is we've seen an area that our sharks are frequenting. We had a shark leave for several months and then come back to this area after doing a massive journey to a completely different part of Indonesia. So that's significant in their movement. And this area is important for a reason. And that means that we've found an area that is probably more beneficial to protect than, say, another area where the sharks are just passing through. So that data is always so handy when we're figuring out, in my case, which boats to hire. So now I focus on working with the shark fishing boats that know and fish in this particular area. It's a bit of a family secret. Not everybody knows where it is, but our tag sharks spend a lot of time there. So the fishermen that work there are the new targets for who I want to hire. And so far, we've done a pretty good job getting all the boats that are able to go to that area to come work for us instead of fishing there.
So there's a lot of thought and planning that goes into connecting all of those pieces in the project and making sure you have the biggest impact that you can. You mentioned that you're not a scientist. A lot of the guests that I talk to either work in higher education or at least are going through higher education. So I think this would be a really great perspective to talk about a little bit of how you get into doing work like this without needing that extra education or that kind of background. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, this is something that comes up quite a lot because the first thing people assume is that I did marine biology or something. And I'm like, yo, I didn't even finish high school because I wanted to focus on diving and filming sharks. So it's not something that's easy to do. I'll start by saying that. But the reality is, if the path you want to follow is conservation, there are many ways to do that. Or if you want involvement in the ocean or you want to make a difference, there are many ways to do that. And academia is one of those ways, but it's not the only way. Some people, like one of my closest friends, Chelsea, who is our scientific officer at Project HIU, she is amazing at all the sciencey stuff and super, super smart. And she's been in school for like the last 9 years of her life, and she's about to be Dr. Chelsea. And that's great. you go do that. But me, I would go absolutely crazy in school. Like I'm still getting her to like proofread my mailing list that I send out. It's not for me. So the path of like filmmaking and going to random places and connecting with fishermen is the path that I wanted to follow. Now, it's really important, I think, that people like myself and these scientists work together. There's things that I could never have done without the people in my life that have gone the route of getting that higher education. There's also things that they could never have done without random high school dropouts like myself befriending shark fishermen. So I think it's really difficult to create your own path in this world if you want to do good, which is why the natural path seems to go and study something so that you can contribute in that way. But it might not be for you unless you're really obsessed with that kind of academic life and that way of having an impact. Then there are always other ways that you can do that. And another really cool part of Project HIU has been seeing how our work there has been helping the scientific community in more ways than one. We've been involved in quite a few scientific discoveries that have come about through our connection with the fishermen. So that's been a really, really nice side effect of what we're doing there. And I have mad respect for people that go to school and do all that stuff, but it's definitely not the only way to do things. And for me, like, I'm really glad that I pursued something different.
I'd also like to talk about the filmmaking background. Project HIU has like a very good presence like on social media and the different videos that you have. I was browsing through your YouTube channel and it's really like well produced. It's really impactful. I'd like to know like how that kind of comes into the visibility of the project and your background with filmmaking in general and how you kind of brought that into this.
Yeah, so it's like a good and bad thing in my mind that these days your ability to create content will greatly affect your ability to be seen and raise money and gather public support. I think it's a really, really, really sad reality sometimes. But we are very, very lucky at Project HIU because before Project HIU, my job was filmmaking and being part of production teams, creating documentaries and filming sharks underwater. And that has helped immensely because telling our story and telling the story of the fishermen and being able to share that is huge. So we're kind of using those powers for good, which has been great. I'm really stoked with our social media and our photos and everything. Like, I love that we're able to do that and to use those skills for that. It's also something for me that I love being able to use to film dead sharks. It's like one of the first things I feel like you notice when you look at my social media or Project HIU's social media is that not many people out there are posting the same kind of stuff that I'm posting, which is dead sharks, sharks being fished, sharks being dragged up on the beach, shark fins drying. But doing that in a way that's beautiful and cinematic is how we raise awareness, and it's important. And I'm really stoked to bring like my skill of documenting sharks to the other side. It also helps that our crew are incredibly photogenic. Like, our fishermen all look like male models. We should make a calendar with them.
Yeah, I saw the little on your website, all the like bios of people. Very funny, amazing. I loved those. It's nice to be able to have a visual to connect to what's going on.
Yeah, and to see that it's real. I feel like that's a big thing is like, yes, our fishermen are real. We do actually work with shark fishermen. Here they are posing. They're adorable.
Yeah. You mentioned that a lot of the stuff that you're posting is a little bit gruesome sometimes or like hard to look at. Can you talk a little bit more about that side of things, like going to markets, what that's like for you, maybe how it's changed since you first experienced that versus now?
A huge part of what we do is documenting those things. It's also how we, I guess, meet the boats we're going to hire, is going right to the start, which is where they're bringing the sharks in to be processed and have the fins sold. So it was definitely easier to begin with. And then the more impact that we've had, the harder it is, the more they want to hide it. So the market's such a strange experience because it's this really hectic place. And anyone that's been on a week-long expedition with Project HIU will tell you this because there's a day of the trip that I take them to the market and potentially scar them for life. But you also leave the market really inspired because you see this trade, you see sharks having their fins cut off, you see some of the largest species that you've probably never seen in the wild on the floor here at the market. And it's so confronting, but then you kind of meet the people behind it and you love them and you understand them and you have these connections with them. So you're forced to look at the bigger picture. So the market's always super inspiring for that reason. And I get a lot of people being like, I don't know how you can do this. I'd be so sad. Congrats on you for being able to do this. How do you not get angry? How do you not get upset? And I think the best answer for that is because we're going there with purpose. Every time we see a boat unloading a huge catch of dead sharks, I think to myself, there's 3 boats that aren't here because of us this month. Every sad drone shot you see of a bunch of sharks on the beach, you just have to remember that that boat didn't catch that many sharks last month because they were hired. So knowing the reason why you're there and knowing that you're having an impact is probably the only thing that can get you through something like that. And also the importance of sharing those messages and knowing that I'm going to be sharing that footage is super important for me.
Yeah. It's also incredibly hard to understand something or tackle an issue or try to learn more about something from the outside when you're not actually seeing it or being immersed in it, I feel like.
Totally. 100%.
Okay, so my friend Dewey, she was wanting to know about like where you see the future of this project going, how it could scale, whether you could see it working in other locations around the world, or like what does the future look like for this?
I think the future looks good. I don't think that this is something that is specific to our area or this particular cause in general. I think using tourism and making people in these sorts of communities being able to profit off the environment being preserved as opposed to fished is a huge opportunity, and it can be molded to anywhere in the world. It has the ability to change who's protecting that area. Is it us, like creating legislation, or is it the locals that are making money from it that's going to be effective? It'll always be the locals, especially in places like Indonesia. I think it's scalable. I think it has the ability to work elsewhere. Me personally, I don't have the time or the energy or the resources to befriend another 50 shark fishermen somewhere else. Like, I definitely am at my capacity of being emotionally attached to random shark fishermen that I just end up wanting to protect forever. So when it comes to can this project be done elsewhere? Absolutely, but it doesn't have to be me doing it. I think people who see this happening in their backyard or see this happening in other parts of the world will be the ones to lead the change and replicate something like this. And I think it's incredibly possible for people to have massive impacts like the one we've had anywhere in the world.
She also had another question about how there's kind of the big perception of sharks kind of hanging around still, of people being afraid of sharks or they're so dangerous or they're big predators. Do you ever get the sense that people think, are sharks even worth saving because of that? Or like, should we put all of this energy into this thing that I'm scared of?
I wish I could ask everybody listening to this podcast that question, because I'm sure there's people listening that either are still scared of sharks or that once upon a time were really scared of sharks and remember a time where they didn't care about sharks. And I think that that's absolutely true. I think there's so many people probably overlook sharks and have overlooked sharks for several years because of this fear around them. It's so much easier for people to conserve animals like dolphins and manta rays and to rally public support to protect these animals and change legislation to protect these animals. When it comes to sharks, you're literally advocating for an animal that people associate with killing humans. It is very difficult. Growing up in Australia, especially, you learn how quickly sharks have become the enemy and how difficult it is to get people to care about them. So, absolutely. And I think that that's changing a little bit now, which is good. I do think that our fear of sharks is slowly getting out of the way and allowing people to see more clearly that they need to be protected.
What are some ways that you think people can kind of try to get past that a little bit, or things that you think help with that?
I think like my favorite type of people are people that are absolutely terrified of sharks. but still care about protecting them. That's my favorite kind of people, because you don't necessarily need to love sharks or be in the water with sharks in order to impact their life or care about them. You know, you can have an impact no matter how you feel about sharks. But I think that people that want to learn more and become more involved can meet sharks through reputable and safe tourism companies doing the right things for sharks. And it's very easy to weed them out, especially after you go and be in the water with them. And most of the people in this industry that are running shark dives truly care about these animals, and they're the best people to introduce you to them. It also takes like a very little bit of study to realize how much of an impact the human race has had on shark populations. And that helps you put things into perspective as well, and maybe stop seeing sharks as the deadly animal when it's humans that are doing more damage than they ever have to our species. So little things like that people can do.
Yeah, that brings up another good question about how tourism can a lot of the times not be beneficial. It can have a lot of negative impacts in different ways. But there's also kind of an emerging ecotourism or just more mindful tourism field. How do you kind of make sure that you're not having a negative impact when you're doing these trips or doing other tourism activities?
So it's definitely difficult when it comes to diving with sharks, especially for me, to find people to do that with that I really trust have the shark's best interest at heart. With Project HIU, we are essentially stopping sharks from being killed. Yes, there's always bad sides to tourism, but it's definitely pretty safe to say that we're probably having a better impact by hiring the boats than not hiring them. When it comes to shark tourism itself, though, that can be a difficult thing to gauge, and there's always negative sides to tourism, especially now. I think shark tourism is getting a little bit crazy to the point where it's becoming very accessible and very like publicized on social media, where people think that it's just like a normal everyday activity. It's always healthy to remember that sharks are wild apex predators and they are dangerous. And that's something we always got to keep in mind when we're getting in the water with them. So again, having that respect but not entitlement towards the species is such an important part of tourism. There's nowhere in the world though that I'm like incredibly stressed about the negative impacts of tourism. I still think that nothing is as bad as the bad things happening to sharks right now, and that's where our focus should be. So it's kind of a hot topic to talk about, like how negative tourism is, but when you look at the goods that it brings, it really does outweigh the negative.
I remembered what I wanted to ask earlier, and it kind of ties in about the danger that comes with shark fishing. I read on your website a little bit about how you survey fishermen to kind of get a better idea of their experiences and things like that, and how there are all these different things that make that line of work dangerous. Sharks aren't really one of them, but can you talk more about what those are and what that experience looks like for them?
Yeah, that was really crazy for me. So essentially what I did is I made this little form, and the form had a bunch of questions on it. And I had my fishermen fill out the form, and then I was going to go home and just use Google Translate to, I guess, figure out what they'd all written. And then my friend also helped me translate them. So when I was in Indonesia, I didn't think much of it. And then I went back to Australia and I started to look through these forms, and I was like, wow, like I had chills down my spine over how much our fishermen had been through when they were out at sea fishing with sharks. We started off small. We only interviewed about 14 shark fishermen, but they were from the major boats that we work with. And out of all of them in the forms, we could see that every single one of them has been injured at sea when fishing sharks. Every single one. And 5 of them had witnessed a death at sea, which is absolutely crazy. Like the hazards involved in that for them. And the most common thing was the lines, because they're pulling in these lines with their hands. And when you're shark fishing, that's really dangerous because sharks are big, strong animals. So if they run with this line, you get tangled in it, you get hooked through the hand, you're gone, you're dragged underwater. So I had a multiple choice question where I was like, what is the most dangerous thing about fishing? Is it the equipment? Is it the weather, like big waves at sea? Is it the police patrolling to see if you do anything wrong? Or is it the sharks? And my fishermen are terrified of sharks, so I thought they would definitely say the sharks. But they ticked everything except sharks. They said the most dangerous things were the waves, the lines, the police, not the sharks. It was all just the process of fishing them that terrified them.
I also saw that it's kind of getting harder to have a successful day fishing because they're having to travel further out or spend more time out. So they're kind of seeing changes in shark populations through that. Can you kind of expand on that a little bit of how the populations are changing and where they are or how big they are?
Absolutely. Without having like the proper data and a proper scientific way to look at it, I can only say what I have inferred from spending time and seeing the catch visually. And it is apparent when you look at the sharks being caught there, and this market that you see in my images, that happens every single day. So the scale in which they're fishing sharks is incredible. The numbers of sharks they fish peaked in the year 2000, and it has been going down ever since, steadily, but it's still been going down. So when you talk to the fishermen, it's very apparent that it's getting harder to catch sharks. And when you look at the catch, the last month that I was there, I was going to the market almost every second day, and it was quieter. And every boat that was bringing in sharks, except for a few that fished areas that they knew through family, through generations of knowledge, every boat was bringing in juveniles, really small sharks, which is not a good sign. It seems that the catch is drastically diminishing and changing. So it's pretty safe to say that the numbers are starting to get affected by the fishing pressure. And we're starting to see that reflected in how difficult it is for them to catch sharks, how long they spend at sea, how far offshore they have to go to catch them. All of that is changing and it's becoming more and more difficult for them.
So, among all of the other reasons why moving into new sources of income are beneficial, it seems like it's also kind of a protection for the future.
Yeah, sometimes I feel like we might have started this project a bit late because it's so clear that it's already the end has already begun when it comes to shark populations. But I also think like the impact we're having could help the future populations bounce back if there's any hope for that. But absolutely, the fishermen are starting to see it, and we are going to have a day, maybe very soon, where there will be no choice but to move into a different occupation because it will be so hard to catch sharks that it just won't be possible. Which is why it's like also a good thing that we've started to do this now, and the fishermen are realizing that there are ways out.
Yeah, hopefully that change kind of happens before it's past the tipping point for sharks. That kind of touches on a lot of the things that I wanted to talk about with Project HIU. I'd like to go back to the beginning when we were talking about your experiences growing up in Australia at the Great Barrier Reef, doing all of those things. I'd like to hear about some experience that really stuck with you that helped build your connection to the ocean, to the environment.
There's definitely a moment that I think really triggered everything that I have done throughout my life. And it's when I was 15 years old and I just dropped out of school. Like I dropped out when I was 14 and I began homeschooling. So at this point, my life was devoted to filming sharks underwater and diving with sharks. And I knew that that's what I was going to be doing and that's what I wanted to do. So I was like already made up my mind. And I was ready to get back in the ocean and see all the things that I saw when I was 12, just a couple of years earlier, growing up, getting to do all that stuff. So I remember going back to the Great Barrier Reef and going back to this area that I grew up diving where we'd always see lots of sharks. And we'd do this night dive with all these reef sharks. And I would do this thing as a kid, scuba diving, which is so dumb now that I look back on it. But I would switch my light off because the lights behind the back of the boat were like big enough. And I would breathe really quickly to accelerate my heart rate. And I would watch the sharks pick up on it. I would watch them come closer to me and like kind of buzz me and move in and out of the area that I was in and pick up on that heart rate and investigate me a little more because I looked like prey essentially. And it was such a cool way to interact with sharks as a kid. pushing the boundaries and doing stuff like that was so much fun. And I remember when I was 15 and we went back to that reef, I was ready to get back in the water and do the same things. And there was no sharks. I got in for that first dive and didn't see a single shark the entire time. I saw one at the very end, and it was too scared to move close to the boat. It was like on the outskirts of the light. And then I started looking into shark fisheries that were operating legally inside the Great Barrier Reef and like inside zones that we thought were protected. And their entire mission was to fish and target sharks. And that fishery was so unsustainable and poor managed that it actually shut down a few years later. But at that time, it was still in operation. And I just remember having this overwhelming sense of I'm 15 years old and I'm starting to see an impact in the shark populations. And I'm starting to see areas where there used to be sharks have less sharks. And that should not be happening. And when you're a kid and you're involved in conservation, I always got told the same thing, like, what do you know? You're too young. But if you're seeing an impact when you're that young and you're noticing it, then you have more of a right to be fighting for these things than anyone. You have more of an understanding of what's happening in our oceans than anyone that's older than you. So being able to compare that reef just a couple years before as a kid was a massive wake-up call. And that's when I was like, okay, I'm going to get heavily involved in conservation and I need to do something about this. And this is really tragic. And that's kind of where it started for me.
Being able to actually see and notice that change. That's something that we kind of touched on in a past episode when we were talking about noticing, wow, there's less snow here in the winters. I wonder if I'm just imagining that or if that's actually what's happening and there's a reason for it. And there is a lot of weight behind personal experiences. You can still notice those really big things.
Absolutely. It's like human nature to notice those things. That's how we survived once upon a time, was to be able to gauge our environment. You'll always be able to see it and feel it, usually before someone's able to bring out science on it. So pay attention to what you notice in your surroundings for sure.
Awesome. Well, I think we've hit a lot of great points. Is there anything else that you would like to end on or add into the conversation?
Not necessarily. I think I would just love everybody to understand that Project HIU is so accessible for so many people. We're far away, we're in Indonesia, but you can be involved. You can help in any way, shape, or form. And if you can come to Indonesia, then you can come be a part of it. And this is how we're going to change the world. And this is how we're going to move forward, is with real connections with people like this and communities like this. And being in the thick of what's happening to sharks is how we're going to save them. And also, if you are in Florida, come diving with me out of Jupiter. There's a link in my social media bio of the shark dives that we run out here. And even if you're terrified of sharks, your life will change after this experience. So I would recommend to come do that for sure, because you'll have the best time.
I know my friend is planning to go do that soon, and she asked if I wanted to go, but I was like, I don't know how to dive. I don't know if I would even...
Can you use a snorkel and breathe through a snorkel? Can you float? Because if you can, then it's absolutely for you.
Yeah, I wanted to ask when you mentioned that, like, what kind of skill level you need to be able to do those kinds of things.
You'd be amazed how many people rock up for a shark dive that cannot swim and don't understand. Like, you'd be amazed. So don't feel like you're not skilled enough. You could definitely come do it.
Awesome. Well, that brings us to the end of the episode then. I'm really glad I got to talk with you and learn more about all of this.
Of course. Thanks for having me. And yeah, I'm stoked to talk about it and just to, I guess, spread the word about our fishermen and our project is always such a great opportunity for us. And we're always super grateful. So yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much. Thanks for tuning into Shellphone to learn about this amazing project and hear from Madison. You can learn more on their website, which is projecthiu.com, or on their social media at Project HIU. They have a lot of great content and lots of ways to support their mission. And then to learn more about our projects, to suggest a guest or donate to the show, you can visit our website at breachthesurface.org or social media at Breach the Surface and at Shelf One Podcast. See you next time.